From being an incomplete creature to having a sharp metal hand, Edward Scissorhands' life is scary and a menace to his neighborhood. Tim Burton, the director of this film, had imagined such a fairy tale since his teenage years, but what is more fascinating is that the weird personality of Edward in the movie is nothing compared to the odd events that took place behind the scenes. Fasten your seatbelt as we unravel 20 weird facts about Edward Scissorhands. Number 20. The Scissorhands were real metal props. One of the most iconic and unforgettable elements of Edward Scissorhands is Edward's hands. The fingers are intricately crafted with blades, a beautiful and terrifying design. While it may be tempting to assume the scissors were digital effects or foam props designed for safety, Edward's Scissorhands were real metal props, designed and engineered to look as menacing as they expressed. Director Tim Burton wanted Scissorhands to feel authentic and weighty, to reflect the burden Edward carried physically and symbolically. They weren't just aesthetics, but central to Edward's character and emotional arc. To make them work, Burton turned to Stan Winston's studio, a legendary effects house known for their work on Terminator, Aliens, and Predator. Stan Winston and his team designed the hands as functioning props made of aluminum and stainless steel, with some lighter materials incorporated to ease Johnny Depp's strain during filming. But even with efforts to reduce their weight, the Scissorhands were heavy, clunky, and sharp. They were far from comfortable. Depp had to spend long hours with his hands encased in complex gear that limited his movement and required intense physical discipline. To manage this, he trained himself to move with caution and precision. In a way, the real Scissorhands forced Depp into character. He couldn't grab a cup, touch another actor, or even scratch his nose. Depp has recalled accidentally scratching himself and narrowly avoiding injuring others during rehearsals. The rig also limited his visibility and mobility. He couldn't feed himself while wearing them and had to rely on assistance during breaks between takes. That inconvenience paid off immensely. The scissors remain a symbol of authentic craftsmanship. Number 19. Tim Burton based Edward on himself.
Don't go, Edward. He didn't wake up. I'm sorry.
The heart of Edward Scissorhands was an emotional blueprint of director Tim Burton's soul. With his awkward silence, artistic gifts, and inability to fit in, Edward reflects Burton as a teenager, growing up misunderstood in the bland suburban sprawl of Burbank, California. Burton has spoken openly about how isolating his childhood was. It was during these years that he began drawing dark, peculiar characters. One of them was a pale boy with scissors hands. It later emerged as a sketch in his notebook while still in high school. That sketch eventually evolved into Edward, the character who would embody everything Burton once felt. Edward's story is the story of a boy who was created different, an unfinished being, not by choice but by fate. He is brought into a community that embraces him for his novelty and talent, only to reject him later when his difference becomes inconvenient or frightening. The neighborhood Edward found himself in was Burton's hyper-stylized satire of Burbank, where he grew up feeling creatively suffocated. Burton didn't just craft a world from his memories, he relived them through Edward Scissorhands. Just like Edward, he often felt like he was speaking a different language from everyone else. His emotions were big and strange, and his way of seeing the world didn't align with how others saw it. Ultimately, Edward Scissorhands isn't just a film, but Burton's love letter to outsiders. Number 18. Johnny Depp only spoke 169 words in the whole film. In a film that relies heavily on subtlety and visual storytelling, Depp spoke only 169 words across the entire 105-minute runtime, yet this quiet restraint helped define Edward's haunting, fragile soul and catapulted Depp from TV heartthrob to serious actor. Tim Burton, known for his love of silent-era films and expressive visual style, envisioned Edward as a modern-day Frankenstein, a character more poetic than verbal, more expressive through emotion than language. Depp immediately understood the assignment when he got the role, so he immersed himself in physical expression most of the time. This lack of dialogue forced Depp to draw inspiration from non-verbal influences. He reportedly studied Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and other silent film legends, to understand how to communicate vulnerability, humor, and sadness without speaking. The result was a performance filled with yearning and sorrow. Even in the silence, his silence became the most heartbreaking part of his character. It demonstrated how a character can dominate the screen not through monologues or verbal wit, but through sheer emotional presence. So while many films rely on words to drive the narrative, Edward Scissorhands proved that sometimes the most powerful emotions are the ones never spoken. Number 17. Tom Cruise was almost cast as Edward. It's hard to imagine anyone but Johnny Depp portraying the fragile, pale-faced Edward Scissorhands, but at one point during casting, Tom Cruise was seriously considered for the role. 20th Century Fox pushed hard for a big-name star to carry the film, and Cruise, one of the biggest box office draws of the late 1980s, seemed like a logical commercial choice. Director Tim Burton, however, was hesitant. His vision for Edward was not just about appearance or fame, but essence. He wanted someone who could portray deep internal pain, vulnerability, and awkwardness without ever tipping into theatrical exaggeration. Still, under studio pressure, he agreed to meet with Cruise to discuss the possibility. During that meeting, Cruise reportedly asked many questions about the character's logic in the world of the film. He wanted to understand how Edward functioned daily. How did he eat with scissors in his hands? How did he bathe? Did he sleep comfortably? These were practical questions from a methodical actor, but he missed the point. Edward Scissorhands was never meant to exist in the realm of realism. Cruise argued about the end part and tried to change some scenes after reading the script, but Burton insisted on what he wanted. He wanted the story to reflect the truth of many outsiders' experiences. Ultimately, Cruise's interest in the role faded, and Burton was free to cast the person he had quietly championed all along, who was no other but Johnny Depp. Number 16. Vincent Price's final role. Edward Scissorhands holds a special place in cinematic history not only for its haunting beauty and emotional depth, but also because it marked the final major film appearance of legendary actor Vincent Price. Often hailed as the master of horror, Price had captivated audiences for decades with his commanding voice and iconic roles in Gothic classics. In Edward Scissorhands, he played the inventor, the gentle, fatherly figure who created Edward but tragically died before he could finish him. The role was deeply personal for director Tim Burton, so casting Vincent Price wasn't just a creative decision, but a homage to a childhood hero. As a lonely kid growing up in the suburbs of Burbank, California, Burton found solace in horror films, particularly the ones starring Price. It was a dream come true when Burton had the chance to include him in Edward Scissorhands. The character of the inventor was tailor-made for Price. Though he appears in only a few flashbacks, the role is pivotal. He is Edward's creator, caretaker, and the only person who ever truly accepted and loved him. When Edward Scissorhands was filmed in 1989, Vincent Price was gravely ill. He suffered from advanced emphysema and Parkinson's disease, and his health limited how long he could be on set. Despite the pain and physical limitations, Price delivered a performance that was warm, wise, and tinged with sadness. Price passed away on October 25, 1993. His final on-screen moments in Edward Scissorhands serve as a fitting farewell. Number 15. The suburb was a real Florida neighborhood. One of the most visually striking aspects of Edward Scissorhands is its portrayal of the suburban neighborhood. Many viewers don't realize this neighborhood wasn't a studio backlot or a fabricated set. It was a real subdivision in Lutz, Florida, just outside of Tampa. When scouting locations for the film, Burton insisted on finding a real neighborhood that could be transformed into the suburb he envisioned. Eventually, the production team discovered a newly developed housing tract in Lutz. The homes were simple, similar in size and shape, and the streets were still relatively uninhabited. But to match Burton's visual aesthetic, the crew had to make significant alterations. After obtaining permission from the homeowners, each house was painted in bright pastel shades, creating a deliberately artificial and overly cheerful vibe. Even the lawns were modified, driveways were polished, mailboxes swapped out, and window treatments were carefully selected to ensure visual uniformity. Burton's vision of suburbia was symbolic. The neighborhood represents conformity, artificiality, and the oppressive normalcy that rejects anything different. Edward is not dismissed because he is dangerous. He is denied because he doesn't fit. In a world where every house is painted the same, difference is feared, even when beautiful. After filming concluded, the crew repainted every house's original color scheme, keeping their promise to homeowners. But some residents reportedly left the new colors up for a long time, enjoying the fame of having their home featured in a Hollywood movie. To this day, Edward Scissorhands fans visit the neighborhood for film tourism. Number 14. Winona Ryder wore a blonde wig. One of the people who captured many audiences' attention after seeing Edward Scissorhands was the golden-haired high school cheerleader Kim Boggs. The dreamy, romantic figure who slowly falls in love with Edward wears a blonde wig throughout the film, a dramatic transformation to achieve Kim's signature appearance. Winona Ryder, who played Kim Biggs, was known for her natural dark hair and brooding screen presence. In films like Beetlejuice and Heathers, which Tim Burton also directed, she played quirky, gothic, and emotionally intense characters. But Kim Boggs was different. She was the sunny, sweet, popular, seemingly innocent girl next door. To visually sell that contrast and emphasize the fairy tale atmosphere, Burton decided that Kim needed to look like the embodiment of suburban perfection, which meant giving her golden, flowing hair. The blonde wig served multiple purposes. First, it starkly contrasted Edward's dark, wild appearance. Second, the wig helped disguise Ryder's well-known gothic image. Behind the scenes, Ryder had mixed feelings about the wig. Wearing it was sometimes uncomfortable, especially in the humid Florida heat where the film was shot. However, she fully embraced the transformation, understanding its importance to the story. Kim's blonde hair would go on to become one of the film's most recognizable visual cues. Number 13. The mansion was built from scratch. In Edward Scissorhands, one of the most striking contrasts in the film lies between the brightly colored, sun-soaked suburb below and the looming, eerie mansion that towers over it from a hilltop. This mysterious place where Edward lives was created and ultimately left unfinished. Many assume that the mansion was a pre-existing haunted house or a digitally rendered structure, but it's not. It was a carefully constructed piece of cinematic art, built from scratch and designed to feel fantastical and tragically real. Isolated, beautiful in its way, and full of forgotten dreams, the house symbolized Edward's internal world. It had to feel like it came from another universe entirely, yet still sit above a perfectly ordinary suburban neighborhood. To bring that vision to life, production designer Bo Welch designed a custom structure partially built on location in Florida and partially augmented with matte paintings and miniatures for exterior shots. Though the full mansion wasn't built in 3 dimensions, enough of its facade and entryway were created to allow for filming of Edward standing at its threshold, silhouetted against the town below. Inside, the mansion was no less ambitious. The interiors were shot on sound stages and included a labyrinth of dimly lit hallways, sculpted shadows, creaky staircases, and abandoned machinery, all covered in layers of dust and time. The mansion's location above the town physically represented Edward's separation from the world that eventually feared and rejected him. The house was crafted specifically to fit into Edward's odd nature. Number 12. The ice dance scene was added late. Of the most hauntingly beautiful and emotionally resonant scenes in Edward Scissorhands is when Kim dances beneath falling snow, which Edward creates while sculpting an angel from a block of ice. This ice dance scene is one of the film's most iconic sequences. However, many fans don't realize it was not part of the original script. Director Tim Burton decided to add the scene late in production. This idea came to Burton during post-production when he reflected on Edward and Kim's relationship and realized that something that could convey love, beauty, and sorrow without words was needed. The production crew quickly constructed the ice sculpting set inside a soundstage to bring this spontaneous idea to life. The ice was made of clear wax, and the snow was made of biodegradable paper flakes filtered through fans above the set. Tim Burton directed the scene meticulously, aiming for something like a dream sequence that said everything about Edward and Kim's impossible love. Visually, the scene stands apart. The soft blue light, Kim's slow motion movement, and Edward's concentrated sculpting evoke a feeling of suspended time. This scene elevates Edward Scissorhands from a quirky fairy tale to a tragic love story. The snow becomes a lasting symbol of Edward's presence in Kim's life. Number 11. Robert Smith inspired Edward's hair. Everything about Edward seems off, from his pale, scarred face to his black leather suit and melancholic eyes. But what is more iconic about his look is his wild, messy, chaotic tangle, gravity-defying black hair. It looks as if it's been struck by lightning and sculpted by a sorcerer. That unique hairstyle was directly inspired by no other but Robert Smith. Director Tim Burton has long been a fan of music that blends melancholy with beauty, and no artist embodied that aesthetic more than Robert Smith in the 1980s. With his teased black hair, smudged eyeliner, pale skin, and haunting lyrics about love and loneliness, Smith was the face of a generation of misfits and romantics. When designing Edward's look, Burton worked closely with hairstylists and costume designers to create something organic to the character. Edward was not a typical teenager. He was an unfinished creation, living alone in a gothic mansion, learning about the world not through social experience but through observation and imagination. His hair needed to reflect that. It had to be unruly and untamed, almost as if he'd never had a haircut, because he hadn't. Robert Smith's influence provided the perfect model. His hair was emblematic of artistic chaos and emotional vulnerability, two traits central to Edward. The hair also served a symbolic function. In many ways, it was the visual opposite of the suburban norm. While the neighborhood's residents had clean, polished, carefully maintained appearances, Edward's look was raw and unfiltered. Fans of The Cure instantly noticed the resemblance upon the film's release, and over the years, Burton has acknowledged Smith as one of the subconscious inspirations for Edward's design. Number 10. The score was Danny Elfman's favorite. The emotional gravity in Edward Scissorhands is carried not mainly by dialogue, but by the film's music, especially Danny Elfman's ethereal, whimsical, and haunting score. Over the years, Elfman has composed music for dozens of major films. Still, he has consistently said that Edward Scissorhands is his most personal and favorite score of his career. From the beginning, Elfman understood that the film wasn't a traditional narrative, but a modern fairy tale about alienation, love, and the painful beauty evoked differently. The music would need to reflect those themes without overpowering them. The central theme, Introduction, or Ice Dance, is instantly recognizable. Its choir of angelic voices and delicate strings evokes the wonder and tragedy of Edward's existence. One of the most potent aspects of Elfman's theme song in Edward Scissorhands is its integration into the storytelling. Scenes like Kim's dance in the snow wouldn't have half the emotional resonance without Elfman's soaring melodies. In interviews, Elfman has revealed that working on Edward Scissorhands was an emotionally intense experience for him. He identified with Edward's sense of isolation and used it to explore his own internal landscape. The score was met with widespread acclaim. Critics and fans praised its haunting beauty. Orchestras have since performed it worldwide. It also marked a significant turning point in Elfman's career, establishing him as a master of cinematic emotion. Number 9. Depp fainted. In the costume, bringing Edward Scissorhands to life was no easy feat, especially for Johnny Depp, who endured immense physical strain while portraying the gentle, misunderstood creation. One of the most grueling aspects of the role was the costume itself. It was a tight, heavy, black leather suit adorned with straps, buckles, and Edward's razor-sharp scissor hands. Added to the hot Florida climate where the film was shot, the costume proved so unbearable that Depp fainted multiple times on set due to overheating and exhaustion. The iconic leather outfit, designed by Colleen Atwood, was meticulously crafted to reflect Edward's status as an artificial being. It was meant to evoke a sense of gothic elegance while emphasizing his fragility and isolation. However, the suit wasn't designed with comfort in mind. It was constructed with genuine leather and thick materials. and Depp was sealed into it for hours at a time, with only brief breaks between takes. The suit offered no ventilation. Once Depp was zipped in, sweat quickly accumulated, making movement slippery and uncomfortable. During long shooting days under hot lights and direct sunlight, Depp's body temperature would rise dangerously, leading to several incidents where he felt lightheaded and eventually collapsed. Crew members rushed to remove the costume and hydrate him. In one notable instance, he fainted while filming a scene outdoors, and the production had to pause until he recovered. Despite the physical toll, Depp remained committed to the role. He understood that the discomfort helped him inhabit the character of Edward, who himself was uncomfortable in his own body. And in the end, Depp's willingness to endure the heat and hardship paid off. His performance is remembered as one of his career's most vulnerable and haunting. Number 8. The movie was almost a musical. Though Edward Scissorhands is revered for its visual storytelling and haunting score, it was initially envisioned as a musical. In its earliest development stages, Tim Burton seriously considered crafting the story as a full-blown musical, with characters singing their thoughts and feelings and entire scenes structured around original songs. Having had a deep affection for dark, emotional, and theatrical musicals, Burton figured that the story of Edward, a misunderstood creation yearning for love in a world that feared him, could fit the mold of a tragic romantic musical. Burton imagined that the inner turmoil of Edward and the small-town hypocrisy surrounding Edward could be heightened through song. However, once Caroline Thompson's screenplay took shape, it became increasingly clear that the heart of Edward's character lay in his inability to communicate through traditional means. Giving Edward songs and lines would undermine the very nature of his identity. He wasn't just a quiet soul, but someone who expressed himself through action, creation, and silent pain. The creative team realized that the musical approach could risk diluting the emotional power of that silence. Instead of songs with lyrics, Burton shifted his musical aspirations into the capable hands of Danny Elfman, who crafted a score that didn't just accompany the story, but told it. Hence, the traditional musical format was abandoned for the film, but the musical spirit never left. Number 7. The film was shot in chronological order. Scenes are rarely shot in the order they appear on screen. Productions typically organize shooting schedules based on logistical factors like actor schedules, location availability, and budget constraints. However, in the case of Edward Scissorhands, Tim Burton made the rare decision to shoot the film chronologically. Burton believed that Edward's emotional journey from isolated creation to tragic outsider would be better understood and portrayed if the actor could live it out in sequence. Since Edward doesn't change much physically throughout the film, and because most of the story is centered around two central locations, it was logistically possible to attempt this unusual approach. For Johnny Depp, this decision allowed him to develop Edward's emotional arc gradually, as if the character was unfolding in real time. Another notable benefit of shooting in sequence was Edward's growing connection with Kim, played by Winona Ryder. Since Ryder and Depp were also romantically involved in real life at the time, their on-screen relationship blossomed in tandem with the story's progression. From a directorial standpoint, Burton used the chronological shooting schedule to fine-tune the film's emotional tone. This decision also helped the supporting cast develop their group dynamic naturally over time. Their growing fear of Edward felt more believable because it was experienced progressively, not pieced together from different days or sets. Ultimately, Burton's decision to shoot chronologically helped make Edward Scissorhands an emotional journey. Number 6. The role revived Vincent Price's career. Although Vincent Price's role as the inventor is small regarding screen time, its impact is massive, especially given that it was Price's final film appearance. Many don't realize that this role revived Price's career in the public eye and gave him a tender cinematic farewell. Vincent Price was a horror icon, famous for his elegant voice and performances in classic horror films like House of Wax, The Fly, and countless Roger Corman adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe stories. For decades, he was the face of gothic horror and always just a little dangerous. But by the late 1980s, his work was limited due to poor health. That was when Tim Burton, a lifelong fan of Price's work, came to revive his career. The two had formed a genuine friendship over time, and when Burton began developing Edward Scissorhands, he wrote the role of the inventor specifically for Price. It was Burton's way of honoring the man who had inspired so much of his gothic sensibility. Though frail, Price agreed to take on the part. His scenes were filmed early in the production schedule to accommodate his health, and the crew made every effort to ensure his comfort on set. He gave a performance that was subtle but profoundly moving. At the end, the film's release introduced a new generation to Vincent Price. Number 5. Anthony Michael Hall's role shocked fans. For audiences familiar with 1980s teen comedies, seeing Anthony Michael Hall in Edward Scissorhands was nothing short of surprising. Known for playing sweet, awkward, nerdy characters, Hall had built his entire early career on portraying lovable underdogs. But in Edward Scissorhands, he shocked fans by playing the role of Jim, the cruel person who bullies Edward and ultimately serves as the film's main antagonist. This drastic transformation shocked fans and critics alike. With his short blonde hair, square jaw, and gym-built body, Hall looked almost unrecognizable from the lanky, dorky characters who made him famous just a few years earlier. When Jim begins tormenting Edward, it doesn't just feel like a betrayal. The guy audiences once loved had become a symbol of oppression and cruelty. Hall's performance was intentionally unrelenting. Jim is rude to adults, controlling toward Kim, and viciously jealous of Edward's gentle nature. The intensity reaches a climax during the film's finale, where Jim attacks Edward and is ultimately killed by him in self-defense. It's a tragic but necessary moment. Critics noted Hall's bold departure from his previous image. He would go on to take more diverse and mature roles, including playing Bill Gates in Pirates of Silicon Valley. In hindsight, Hall's casting was a brilliant subversion that reminds us that even in a fairy tale about scissors for hands, the real surprise can be how people change, evolve, and challenge what we expect of them. Number 4. Kim's dance in the snow was done to silence. The unforgettable snow dance scene is one of the most visually and emotionally powerful moments in Edward Scissorhands. Kim, bathed in a soft snow flurry created by Edward's ice sculpting, spins in silent wonder. Most viewers don't know that this delicate, emotional scene was filmed without music. During production, director Tim Burton boldly decided to have Winona Ryder dance to complete silence. Ryder had to rely solely on her instincts, her emotional connection to the scene, and Burton's vision. This unusual approach resulted in a raw, honest, and beautifully unchoreographed performance. Burton believed that the silence would allow Ryder to express something purely internal. Instead of reacting to a pre-written score, Ryder moved with emotion. On the other hand, the snowfall became Edward's final gift to her, a sign that he was still alive and creating, even from a distance. After the scene was shot, composer Danny Elfman took that silent footage and composed something that perfectly matched the rhythm and feeling of Ryder's movements. Inspired by the haunting vulnerability in Ryder's performance, he formed the Ice Dance theme, which is now considered one of his most celebrated musical pieces. Elfman's composition, built on light choral voices and soaring string melodies, is melancholic and enchanting. The creative decision to film the scene in silence and add the music later may sound risky, but it speaks volumes about the trust and synergy between Burton, Ryder, and Elfman. Even decades later, fans recall this scene as one of the most magical moments in cinema. Number 3. The grass was painted green. Tim Burton didn't craft Edward Scissorhands to reflect reality. Instead, it was designed to portray a twisted version of suburban perfection. The environment had to be a pastel-colored dreamscape where every house looked identical. But there's a little issue. The Florida neighborhood where the film was shot wasn't as uniform or vibrant as Burton imagined. So, to bring his fantasy world to life, the production team spray painted the grass green. The process was labor-intensive. Each lawn had to be covered evenly so that no spot looked out of place. The result was freshly painted grass that gave the entire neighborhood an eerily uniform appearance. The setting plays a huge role in shaping the narrative to convey the story of Edward Scissorhands. This attention to detail extended throughout the production. Not only was the grass painted, but the houses were repainted in Easter egg colors, and residents' belongings were temporarily removed to preserve the illusion of uniformity. Interestingly, many locals who lived in the neighborhood then were reportedly surprised and amused by the grass painting process. Some even said that the artificial green lawns looked better than their real ones ever had. Painting the grass green was a deliberate artistic choice supporting the film's themes. Number 2, it was almost an animated film. Before Edward Scissorhands became a beloved live-action fantasy classic, director Tim Burton initially considered telling the story in animation. Remember that the earliest seeds of the story came from a simple drawing Burton sketched in high school. Because of his strong visual imagination, animation felt like a natural outlet. Burton studied at CalArts, a prestigious animation school backed by Disney, and worked as an animator and concept artist for Disney during his early career. Some of his earliest creative works, such as Vincent, a stop-motion short film narrated by Vincent Price, were animated. So when the idea of Edward Scissorhands began to evolve into something more serious, Burton considered turning it into an animated feature. However, the emotional weight of Edward's journey ultimately persuaded Burton to go in a different direction. He realized that to tell this story with the depth and heartbreak he envisioned, he needed real human performances. Burton wanted viewers to see Edward's eyes tremble, to feel the silence in his body language, and to connect with his pain on a profoundly human level. A human actor would be needed to achieve that result. Despite Edward Scissorhands not being a cartoon, Burton's background in animation shaped how the film looked and felt, giving it a heightened, storybook aesthetic. Number 1. There's a hidden message in the ending. The ending of Edward Scissorhands is often remembered for its poetic blend of melancholy, closure, and a lingering sense of mystery. But beneath its poetic surface lies a hidden message. It's nestled in the final words of the story told by the older woman, revealed to be an aged Kim, in the soft snowfall that closes the film. This ending reveals that Edward is still alive, still creating and still loving her from afar. After a violent confrontation with Kim's boyfriend Jim, Edward disappears into his hilltop mansion, and the townspeople never see him again. After that incident, the story fast-forwards to a much older Kim, now a grandmother, telling her granddaughter a bedtime story about a man with scissors in his hands. She explains that she never saw Edward again, but in her heart, she believed it was better this way. If he stayed alone, far from the cruelty and prejudice of the world that had once welcomed him only to reject him, he would be safe, at least. He could live without fear of being hunted, mocked, or misunderstood. She wanted to protect the memory of their time together, unspoiled by what might happen if they met again under the wrong circumstances. In her mind, distance was not the end, it was a shield. But then comes the moment that holds the quiet, hidden truth. Kim's curious and innocent granddaughter asks, "Why does it snow?" The question lingers, and Kim's face softens as she gazes into the distance. Her voice becomes almost a whisper as she answers, "Because he's still up there, carving." The words carry more than explanation, they carry confession. The scene shifts, and we see Edward in his lonely Gothic castle high on the hill, surrounded by a frozen glow. His hands, those sharp, dangerous blades, move with an artist's precision, shaping enormous ice sculptures. As he carves, the shards rise into the air and drift outward, breaking apart into countless delicate snowflakes. They float over the town, covering everything in a white, glistening silence. It is breathtaking, magical, and bittersweet. This is not just beauty for beauty's sake. It proves Edward is still alive. Kim's words were not just a romantic sentiment to comfort her granddaughter, they were her way of revealing that she has always known where he is and carried him in her heart. Director Tim Burton and writer Carolyn Thompson intentionally designed this ending to walk the fine line between mystery and certainty. On the surface, it feels ambiguous. You never see Edward and Kim together again, and there is no reunion, no closure in the traditional sense. But emotionally, it is crystal clear. It speaks to a truth that love can endure even when two people are separated by distance, danger, or tragedy. Edward never stopped loving Kim. The ice he carves year after year is not just art, it is devotion, a silent way of keeping her in his world. And Kim never forgot him. Even after decades, she speaks of him with tenderness, never bitterness. In a world that tried to reshape Edward into something he wasn't, he chose to remain true to himself instead. He left the place that rejected him, but he left behind something beautiful. Snow, falling gently over the people who once turned away from him. It is his gift, his quiet way of saying he exists, even if they cannot see him. And the lesson is this: when you find yourself in a place where you are not accepted, where your presence is met only with misunderstanding or hostility, the best thing you can do is walk away, not in anger, not in defeat, but in peace. Sometimes leaving is not losing, it is choosing freedom, and in that choice, you can still leave behind a legacy that outshines the rejection. When Edward withdrew from the world, everyone was safer, everyone could move on, and yet because of his love for Kim, the world still received beauty it did not deserve. How can you relate to Edward's life in Edward Scissorhands? Share with us in the comments and hit the subscribe button. Also, like Shard and engage with other videos on this channel.